There is a particular kind of freedom that only becomes available when you stop trying to hold something. Not the freedom of having given up on what you loved. Something different. The freedom that comes from releasing the need to be at the center of things, from letting go of the controlling grip on your own position, and discovering that what was underneath the grip was richer and quieter and more genuinely yours than the position ever was. For most of the 1930s and 1940s, Bing Crosby was the most popular entertainer in the world. Not one of the most popular, the most. His recordings outsold every competitor. His radio programs were among the most listened to in America. His films, musical comedies that had a particular warmth and ease, drew audiences year after year in numbers that reflected something beyond mere popularity. People felt something for him. The voice, the persona, the quality of relaxed warmth that he carried into every medium, these had produced a connection between Crosby and his audience that was, for the period, almost without precedent. And he had maintained that position not by accident, but by effort. The ease was real, but it had been built on an underlying discipline that was considerable. He was a professional in the fullest sense, someone who understood his craft and worked at it, who made decisions about his career with a seriousness that the relaxed exterior didn't suggest. He had controlled his career carefully, making choices that extended his reach and maintained his position, and he had been successful at it in a way that required real skill. But the position, maintained so carefully for so long, had a cost that he came to understand only gradually. The need to stay relevant, to keep pace with a popular culture that was moving in directions increasingly different from where he had come from, required a kind of continuous straining that was, over time, becoming more difficult to sustain. The world was changing. The audiences were changing. The music that was now at the center of American popular culture was very different from what he had made, and the gap between where culture was going and where he most naturally lived was widening. He could keep straining toward the center, or he could let the center go. He let it go. Not in a dramatic announcement, not with any obvious display of retirement. Just gradually, over the course of the 1950s and into the 1960s, allowing his relationship with work to shift, performing less, recording less for the commercial center of the market, spending more time on the ranch in Nevada where he had settled, pursuing golf and family, and the particular quiet of a life that no longer required him to be at the center of anything. He was, by most accounts, happier in that quiet than he had been at the height of everything. What he found, on the other side of the straining, was something he described in terms that surprised people who expected him to mourn the lost position. He found time. Not time in the abstract. He had always had the same amount of time as everyone else. But time that felt different. Uncolonized by the demands of maintaining relevance, unscheduled by the machinery of a career that was always moving toward the next project, the next performance, the next opportunity to hold the position. Time that was simply time, available for whatever the morning offered, without the overlay of professional necessity. He said it was one of the great discoveries of his later life. Not the absence of work. He continued to work in forms that pleased him, but the absence of the needing to be at the center of it, the release of the grip. the freedom that turned out to be waiting all along on the other side of it. Maybe there is something in your own life that you are still gripping. Not necessarily a career position, though that is one form it takes, but any form of needing to be at the center of something, to be recognized, to be consulted, to be the person whose opinion is sought, to maintain a role that has been yours for so long that releasing it feels like losing yourself. Maybe a role in your family, maybe a position in a community, maybe a version of yourself, competent, in charge, the one others look to, that you have been maintaining for so long that you've lost track of the difference between the role and the person underneath it. Letting go of that kind of control is not the same as retreating from life. It is not defeat, and it is not giving up. It is the decision to invest your energy in something more genuinely yours, something that doesn't require the continuous straining of maintaining a position, but that gives back in proportion to what you bring. Something that can sustain you not because of its visibility, but because of its actual value to the person you actually are. Bing Crosby found on his ranch in Nevada that what he had been working toward all along was already there. Not on the charts, not in the box office, not in any external measure of his standing. In the quiet morning and the golf game, and the particular quality of an evening spent with people who valued him for something that had nothing to do with his position. That was what had always been the point. He had just taken a while to get there. He continued to record in his later years because he loved the music, not because he needed the commercial success. The distinction, once he had found it, made all the difference. The work done from love rather than from the need to maintain something. The golf played for pleasure rather than as part of any larger project. The mornings spent however the morning suggested, rather than however the career required. He called those years the best ones. Is there something you would do differently if you released the need to be at the center of it? If the maintaining, the effort of holding the position, of being the person others expect, of keeping the role that has been yours, were no longer required, what would you do with the morning? What would you invest in if the investment didn't need to produce anything visible? What would simply give you pleasure, or rest, or the particular satisfaction of doing something well that only you need to know about? Those answers, if you find them, are the life that is waiting on the other side of the control. Not a smaller life, a more genuinely yours one. The one that doesn't need to prove anything to anyone, because its value is not in its position, but in its actual texture. Bing Crosby found it, and he found it was what he had always been working toward, without quite knowing it. One more thing worth naming. The release of control tends to happen in stages, rarely all at once. More often as a series of small decisions, each one releasing a little more of the grip, each one discovering that the loosening produced something better than the holding. You don't have to let go of everything at once. You don't have to make a dramatic announcement or a formal retirement. You just have to be willing to loosen, slightly, one place where the grip has been tightest. To see what is there when you're not holding so hard. And then, if what you find is good, more life, more ease, more of actually being in your days rather than managing them, to loosen a little more. Bing Crosby loosened gradually over years, and what he found at the end of the loosening was a life that was, by his account, fuller than the one he had worked so hard to maintain. Quieter, less famous, less at the center of anything measurable, and incomparably better. So take a slow breath and find one place this week where you might loosen slightly. One thing you have been holding that might be held more lightly. One role or expectation or need to be at the center of something that might be released just a little. Just enough to see what is on the other side, what was waiting there all along. What Bing Crosby found, in the quiet of his later years, was that the other side was where the real life had been waiting. And it is probably waiting for you, too. There is something else his story offers, something about what the people around us experience when we begin to loosen our grip. Because one of the fears that keeps the grip in place is the fear of being less to others. The worry that if we step back from the center, if we are less the person in charge, less the one others look to, less the force that drives the room, the people around us will value us less. That our worth to them is tied to our position, and that without the position we become less necessary, less seen, less loved. What Bing Crosby found was exactly the opposite. The people who loved him, his family, the few friends who were genuinely close, responded to the less driven version of him with more warmth, not less. Because the driven version, for all its achievements, had been somewhat harder to reach. The position and the maintaining of it had created a kind of distance, a quality of presence that was always slightly divided, partly in the room, partly in the next career decision. And when the maintaining became less important, the presence became less divided, more fully there, more available, more fully the person rather than the professional. The people you love probably want more of you, not more of your position, more of your actual presence, more of the conversations that go somewhere real, more of the evenings that don't have an agenda, more of the you that exists when the professional self is set aside and the actual self is what's there. Loosening your grip on control doesn't diminish what you offer. It often, quietly, gradually, makes it richer. Because presence, freed from management, has a different quality. And the people closest to you will feel it. And be glad.